I want to go over some of the other functionalities that we can do with CSS Flex. And what you can see here on the website from CSS Tricks is that the CSS properties for CSS Flex divide into two groups. One is the properties that we apply to what they call the container. Container in our example is the row that we have here. Okay, so this row has display flex. This is called the Flexbox, and this is the container because it contains elements that are flexible once we have the display flex. So to the container, we can add more than just display flex. We can decide the direction of the items. We can decide how to align the items and so on. When it comes to the items themselves, we have other CSS properties. CSS properties that we can apply to the items themselves, like how the item will grow if there is extra space, or how much the item will shrink. Maybe we want the item not to shrink if there isn't enough space. So we can control it using properties that we apply to items inside the container, not the container itself, but inside the container. You can see it by the diagrams here, where the point in the container and items inside. One of them that I want to show you, let me expand the page here a little bit. We'll go over to checkers to the box. Now we'll remove the flex grow. Okay, so all of the boxes that I have, all of them are width 50 and height 50. And if I'm shrinking, it will shrink depending on the shrinking size that I'm applying. One thing I can do, instead of flex grow 1, I can tell them to flex shrink 0. When I'm telling them to flex shrink 0, I'm telling the divs inside the flex boxes that even if it's getting smaller and smaller, do not shrink. You see they're not shrinking? It's called an overflow. They're overflowing their container. You see the container ends somewhere here and the entire div, but they are overflowing it. You can see here that it overflows the container. It gives me some scroll here. Okay, so this is another useful CSS that we can apply if we don't want something to shrink. Maybe it's an image and we don't want this image to get smaller and smaller because then it will make the image look weird. Another thing that we can do if we have extra space, and it's only in the case of extra space. So when I'm going over with my mouse on the Flexbox, you can see it highlights in blue the content of the Flexbox, all of the elements inside of it. And you can see to the side there is this purple area. This purple area is the extra space, and I have some extra space here. I can make the boxes grow to fill in the extra space, but I can also distribute the space in a different way. And what I want to show you that I can apply to this specific row, we'll do it only to this specific row, using something called justify content. And justify content is a CSS property that I apply to the Flexbox. I apply it to the container. And I have many values here. And you can see I have some icons that kind of describe what is the behavior of each value. So let's take, for example, space around. Okay, or you know what? Let's start with something, in my opinion, easier, space between. What we can see that, let's do something else. Let's also add to each box, if it doesn't have background black, let's add background white. Oh, sorry, I need to add it to everyone. Okay, so I have boxes. They either have they either has a background black, so it overrides the background white, and if they don't have box black, they have background white. Remember, this is a playground, so it's not saved to the file, it's just for demonstration. The reason I'm applying it because I wanted to see all of the divs. Let me again remove the justify content, and I will go over the Flexbox here, and you see the space to the right. If I'm applying the justify content, and I will go over again the div here, you see that all of the space that I had to the right is now distributed between the divs, between the elements inside the Flexbox. This is what space between means. Space between means if there is space distributed evenly between all of the elements inside. Other than space between, I have space around. It also adds spacing to the beginning and the ending. What it actually means, it takes a space and distributes it evenly around each element. So around the element, I have even spacing to the right and left, where in between I have an even spacing between the elements. So it kind of gives me also spacing in the beginning and the ending of the div. Other than that, I also have space evenly. And space evenly, like it sounds, it distributes all of the space evenly between all of the elements inside, also in the beginning and the end. The last one that I want to show you is flex end. And what flex end means is to put the space at the beginning of the flexbox. So instead of flex start, which is the default value, so this is the default behavior, flex start, it starts painting all of the divs and then adds a space. Flex end does the opposite. So it's usually a good way of kind of aligning elements to the right. Okay. Other than that, let's assume that some of the boxes has different height. Okay. So everything which is box black, and I'm kind of deviating from the checkers board just for this example. Okay, so again, of course, this is checkers board, but I'm kind of deviating from it to explain something. So we'll use height 20 pixels. Let's do something a little bit more. Let's do 30 pixels. What I'm saying here, that all of the boxes has width and height of 50 pixels. All of the boxes that also has box black has height of 30 pixels, so it overrides the height 50 pixels. And now you can see that inside my Flexbox, I have multiple divs. Some of them has 50 pixels height, some of them has 30 pixels height. And you see they are aligned to the top of the Flexbox. So all of the divs that does not fill the entire height are aligned to the top. One thing I can do with that is using something called align items. And align items tells the Flexbox to distribute the elements inside of it vertically in a different way than flex start. So flex start is the default behavior, and you can even see it that there is this icon that represents that everything is aligned to the top. I can do flex end, and you can see that everything starts from the bottom of the Flexbox. And I can also do, and it's something very useful, center, which will center all of the elements inside the Flexbox. So you can see that everything is centered. This is very useful when you have a Flexbox with multiple elements. Usually we're not using just boxes, we have images and text. And not all of them has the same height, and we want all of them to align together on the same vertical line. So this is very useful using align item centers. There's also stretch, but in this case, stretch won't work because we have a fixed height, okay? Because there is a fixed height, stretch won't work. Stretch works when the height is calculated by the amount of content inside the div. So in this case, it's not what work. Won't work in this case. I want to do the same example with display flex with the website that we did before. I have the div here, which wraps h1 and a paragraph. Now both div h1 and paragraph has display block, but I want the h1 and the paragraph to be inside the Flexbox. I want them to be on the same row, okay, inside this div, and I want their size to change depending on the size of the div. So I will add display flex here. And one thing you can see, the two of them are inside the same row, even though they are still display blocks. So remember, Flexbox changes the behavior of the elements inside the Flexbox itself, okay? And what is the next thing I want to do is I want to tell the elements, I want them to be aligned to the center. So we'll do align items, center. What happened? First of all, it kind of makes sense, right? The h1 has this height because it has large text, and the paragraph has a different height because it has less text, so the text is smaller. And when I'm doing align center, it aligns them to the center even though they don't have the same height. It's not because I have some fixed height applied to them, but I have content inside of them, which calculates or determines the height of those elements. The default align items, and it's contrary to what I said before, which is flex start. It's not flex start, it's flex stretch. So stretch, if they don't have a fixed height like we have in the checkers, we don't specify a specific height with pixels, it will stretch the elements. So they will all stretch to the highest height of the elements inside of it. Another cool thing that we can use with CSS, with CSS Flex, let me refresh the page. When I will refresh the page, it will delete everything I wrote here, which is not saved to the file. So I want to kind of restart. Cool. So now I have the CSS and HTML back to its origin. And what I want to do now is I want to show you something which is also useful. In this case, it's kind of it will be weird when we're doing checkers, but it will be useful for other implementations. So hopefully you will find it something that you can use in your websites. Let's go back and delete the flex grow here. Okay, so they stay in the same width. And instead of shrinking them, I want them to collapse to a different row. So let's do it with the first one. I will do flex wrap, and I will do just wrap. And what it tells the Flexbox that if there is not enough space, put the other divs, okay, if there is not enough space for everyone, just throw them to a new line. You will wrap them so we all be together and we'll break the lines. Sometimes it's useful if you want something not to shrink or expand and you don't want an overflow, you can wrap. You can think of it like a gallery of images. It might be a lot of images on the same row, but if the page is small, I want it to wrap to be on multiple rows, okay? Maybe if it's on mobile, I want it to be each one of them to take their own row, and depending on the size and the width of the elements inside of it. So CSS wrap or flex wrap inside the Flexbox can be sometimes useful.